Hi everyone. Thanks for being here. Let me start with a simple question. Have you ever seen a country's economy level up super fast, almost like in a video game? That's basically Korea's story. People sometimes call it the miracle on the Han River, because Korea went from being very poor after the war to becoming a major industrial and high-tech economy in just a few decades. Today I am going to explain that story using one idea, a growth regime. Don't worry, this is not a scary term. It just means the overall system that makes growth happen, the rules, the government policies, the way companies work, and how people are educated and trained. Now, picture Korea in the early 1960s. There was not much money, not much technology, and the country didn't yet have strong institutions, like well-developed banks, advanced factories, or big research labs. Economists call that situation economic backwardness. So the big question is, if Korea started with so little, how did it grow so quickly? What was the engine that powered this sprint? That's what we will unpack together. We maximize the latecomer advantage by learning from paths that advanced economies had already paved. To achieve compressed growth, accomplishing in a few decades what others did over a century, Korea built its own distinctive institutions, including the developmental state and the large business group, or chaebol system. It was like fitting a powerful hybrid engine into a car that had none, and then racing onto the highway. Now, let's unpack the blueprint that made this great sprint possible. On the next slide, you will see how familiar economic logics collided with one another. Here is the roadmap for today. Super simple. Just 4 steps. First, we will go back to the starting line and talk about the big debate. Was Korea's growth mainly driven by the market, where companies compete freely, or by the government, through strong state planning and support? Second, we will look at what the Korean government actually did, especially during the rapid industrialization period, like how it pushed exports and supported certain industries. Third, we will talk about what changed from the 1980s onward, when Korea started opening up more to the global economy and relying more on markets. This includes both good results and some painful lessons. And finally, we will zoom in on one unique feature of Korea, big business groups, called chaebol. We will talk about why they were helpful for growth, but also why they create challenges today, especially when we think about innovation and fairness. If you keep these 4 steps in mind, the whole story will feel much easier to follow. The first key to unlocking Korea's growth story lies in the relationship between the state and the market. In the next section, let's step into the arena where that debate was at its hottest. Okay, so when people try to explain Korea's economic success, there is a big argument that shows up again and again. It is basically, was it the market or was it the government? One side, often called the market-centered view, says something like this. Look, if you protect private property, keep inflation under control, and let companies compete, the economy can grow. In this view, the government's job is kind of like being a good school administrator. Keep things stable, make fair rules, and then let students, the companies, study and compete. So from that perspective, Korea grew because entrepreneurs worked hard, exports increased, and competition pushed firms to get better, while the government mainly made sure the basic environment didn't collapse. But as we will see, Korea's story isn't quite that simple, because the government often did much more than just set the rules. In the 1990s, however, the World Bank proposed a new concept, the market-friendly approach. The argument was that the government didn't simply stand back. When markets failed to function properly, it intervened to strengthen market adjustment. Put simply, rather than just maintaining the field, the coach stepped in at the right moments with tactics and guidance. Korea exhibited a highly sophisticated mix of policies that is difficult to explain using only one of these perspectives. So what were the magical policy ingredients that many East Asian economies had in common? Let's take a look on the next slide. Now let's talk about what many people call the East Asian miracle. Korea wasn't alone. Several East Asian economies grew really fast, and researchers asked, okay, what did they do that worked so well? A helpful way to understand it is to think of a recipe with 2 parts. Part 1, the basics, things almost every country needs. For example, investing a lot in education so people can read, write, and develop skills. Also keeping prices relatively stable, so businesses can plan and invest without feeling like everything is unpredictable. Part 2, very targeted government push. This is where East Asia looked different. Governments didn't just hope money would flow into important industries, they actively guided it. One famous tool is what economists call financial repression. Again, scary words, simple meaning. The government used the financial system, like banks and interest rates, to make sure cheaper loans went to industries it wanted to grow fast. So if you imagine the economy as a garden, the basics are like good soil and clean water. The selective intervention is like the gardener deciding, these plants are our priority, and giving them extra sunlight and fertilizer on purpose. The key point is that government support was not handed out for free. Firms were held to a strict standard, export performance, and made to compete. Companies that could not deliver were forced out, while high performers received strong backing. Skilled technocrats acted like orchestra conductors, coordinating the flow of resources. In the next part, we will examine in detail how this system operated during the Park Chung-hee administration, when it truly went into full gear. Let's jump into the 1960s and 1970s, when Korea's growth really started to accelerate. At that time, Korea had a huge problem. It didn't have enough foreign currency, like US dollars, to buy machines, oil, and other things from overseas. And foreign aid was not something Korea could rely on forever. So the government basically said, if we want to survive, we have to earn money from the world. That is why exports became such a big deal. So here is what happened in simple terms. The government set up a system that rewarded companies for exporting. If a company increased exports, it could get benefits, like easier access to loans, licenses, or support. If it didn't perform, it wouldn't get the same help. This made exporting feel like a national mission, not just a business choice. Then, in the 1970s, Korea went even bigger. Instead of only making light products, the government pushed heavy and chemical industries, things like steel, shipbuilding, petrochemicals, and machinery. These are expensive industries that take years to build, so it was a bold, risky move. But it also became a key step in moving Korea toward advanced manufacturing. During this period, the government effectively operated banks as if they were government departments, using them as instruments for policy execution. Under the goal of growth first, labor movements were suppressed, and wages were kept low. It was an era when all values were vertically aligned toward economic development, akin to a harsh wartime mobilization system chosen by a late industrializing country to overcome capital scarcity. Did this system continue into the 1980s? Change arrived sooner than many expected. Take a look at the next slide. So, after pushing super hard in the 1970s, Korea started to face some serious side effects, kind of like when you sprint too fast and then your body gets exhausted. There was too much investment in some areas, and the economy had imbalances, both inside Korea and in trade with other countries. So in the 1980s, policy started to change. The key words here are stability, openness, and autonomy. Stability means the government began focusing more on keeping inflation low and managing money more carefully, so prices didn't jump around a lot. Openness means Korea continued to connect more with the global economy, trade, competition, and international standards. Autonomy means moving away from the government controlling everything directly and letting companies and markets make more decisions on their own. One important result of this shift was that Korea built stronger economic basics, like healthier public finances. And that mattered later, because it helped Korea survive big shocks like the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis. Financial policy also evolved. The Bank of Korea began to look less like a place that simply printed money and more like a modern central bank, communicating with markets through interest rates. Gradually, Korea moved away from ad hoc intervention toward system-based governance. This was an important transitional step from state-led growth to more market-led growth. Yet even amid these changes, there were painful policy mistakes. In the next section, we will examine the light and shadow of liberalization. Now we get to a really important lesson. Opening up to the world can be great, but if you do it in the wrong order, it can also be dangerous. Starting in the 1980s, Korea gradually opened trade and reduced import restrictions. That helped Korean firms compete globally and learn faster. Then, in the mid-1990s, Korea joined the OECD, which is often seen as the club of advanced economies. But here is where things went wrong. Korea loosened rules on short-term foreign borrowing first. Think of short-term borrowing like using a credit card that you must pay back very soon. It can be okay, but if many companies do it at the same time and lenders suddenly get scared, the money can disappear overnight. Meanwhile, long-term borrowing, more like a stable student loan with a longer schedule, was still more controlled. So the system became unbalanced. Too much short-term money coming in. This is one of the key background factors behind the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The big takeaway is, liberalization isn't just open everything. The timing and sequence really matter. Over time, this imbalance accumulated and culminated in the 1997 Asian financial crisis. After the crisis, Korea opened its capital markets fully, painfully but decisively, and shifted its exchange rate system to a free-floating regime. It was the moment Korea became fully integrated into the global economic system, but it also inherited a new challenge: volatility driven by capital inflows and outflows. The era when the state controlled everything was coming to an end. On the next slide, we will look at the essence and transformation of the developmental state model. Let me introduce a famous idea that many professors use to explain Korea. It is called the developmental state theory, and it is strongly connected to a scholar named Chalmers Johnson. Here is the easy version. A developmental state is a government that doesn't just do paperwork. It has a clear national goal, usually economic growth, and it has skilled officials, or technocrats, who are trained to plan and execute policies. In this model, the government tries to stay relatively autonomous, meaning not constantly changing plans because of political pressure from different groups. That can make policy more consistent over time, especially in the early stage of development. Another key point in Korea's case is how the government worked with big companies. Think of it like a team project. The government set directions and provided support, and big firms executed big industrial projects quickly. Researchers sometimes call this state corporatism without labor, which is a complicated phrase, but the meaning is simple. The government and big business had a strong partnership, while ordinary workers and labor unions had much less voice in the decision-making process. This structure helped Korea move fast, but later, it also created social and political tensions, especially as Korea became more democratic. However, after democratization in 1987, cracks began to appear in this once solid wall. As civil society's voice grew and the WTO system took hold, the old approach, directly subsidizing specific firms, became less viable. Economic leadership gradually shifted from the government to large conglomerates. A qualitative transformation in the government's role became necessary. In the next part, we will take a closer look at another central actor in Korea's economy, large business groups. Now let's talk about one of the most Korea-specific parts of this story, big business groups, what Koreans call chaebol. In many countries, companies compete as individual firms. But in Korea, a lot of economic activity has been organized around large business groups that own many affiliated companies, electronics, construction, finance, chemicals, and so on, all connected under one group. Why did this happen? One big reason is that Korea was short on resources, money, technology, and experienced managers. So the government often chose a small number of firms and supported them heavily. The idea was, if we bet on a few, they can grow big fast, and then the whole country benefits through exports and jobs. So you can think of it like building a national champion team. If you want to compete internationally, you train a few teams very intensely, rather than spreading resources equally across everyone. This is why Korea is often described as a coordinated market economy. Coordination inside groups and between government and business mattered a lot, especially during fast growth periods. This system can be extremely powerful in times of crisis. Affiliates help one another, share information, and generate synergies. But it also created a serious side effect, the concentration of economic power. You might think of it as an older sibling taking most of the family's support, while the younger siblings work under them. Let's look at how this structure operated more concretely using the keywords conception and execution. Please see the next slide. Okay, for this slide, I want you to remember one key idea. Korea got really good at dividing work into two parts, thinking of the plan and carrying out the plan. The fancy words on the slide are conception and execution, but honestly, it's just design versus do. Here is a simple example. Imagine you're building a Lego set. Someone reads the manual and decides what to build and in what order. That's conception. Then someone else puts the pieces together very fast and very accurately. That's execution. Korea became world-class at the second part, building quickly, improving quality, and producing at a huge scale. In many Korean business groups, a small top team, often the founder and a few close executives, made the big decisions: where to invest, which industry to enter, what the target product should be. Then the affiliated companies and subcontractors focused on doing the work efficiently: engineering, manufacturing, logistics, and so on. If you're a latecomer country trying to catch up, this can be extremely effective. Why? Because you don't need to invent everything from zero. You can learn fast from what already exists, copy smartly, and improve the process. And when resources are limited, centralized decisions can move faster than endless discussion. So the big point is, Korea's catch-up strategy wasn't just work hard. It was also a specific way of organizing work, strong top-down planning, and super strong execution on the ground. Engineers became highly skilled at interpreting advanced countries' blueprints, and workers became exceptionally fast at manufacturing. As a result, Korea reached world-class levels in process control and production capability. But this very success formula is now turning into a growth trap, because we did not build enough capacity to draw the blueprint ourselves. On the next slide, we will see what shadows this trap is casting over Korea's economy. So here is the problem Korea faces today. Korea became amazing at making things efficiently, often even better and cheaper than other countries. But when it comes to creating the first idea, the what should we make in the first place part, there is still a weakness. On this slide, that's what concept design capability means. It is the ability to imagine a product or service that doesn't exist yet, and then define it clearly. Think, not just improving someone else's smartphone, but coming up with a completely new category. A lot of people describe this with a funny phrase, fear of the whiteboard. Imagine you walk into a room, there is a big blank whiteboard, and the boss says, "Okay, draw the future product." If you're used to having a blueprint already, that blank board can feel scary. You might wait for someone else to start first, or you might only make small changes instead of a bold new design. And why does this matter? Because Korea is no longer just catching up. In many industries, Korea is already at the top level. That means the next step isn't copying, it's leading. And leading requires creativity, risk-taking, and lots of experiments, some of which will fail. So when we talk about Korea's future challenge, it's not only about working harder. It's about building a system that makes it easier to create new ideas, especially for smaller firms, startups, and younger talent. Up to now, Korea has advanced through a catch-up strategy. But we are entering an era of frontier competition, where we must stand at the front and lead. A chaebol-centered vertical structure can be excellent for fast execution, but it may hinder innovation, where creativity and diverse experimentation are essential. This is one reason we see cases where dominant conglomerates use market power to suppress innovation by smaller firms. So what changes do we need to prepare in order to overcome these structural limits? In the next part, we will look for answers. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about growth first, but Korea didn't stay in that mindset forever. Society changed, and people's priorities changed too. After democratization in the late 1980s, Koreans started saying, wait, growth is important, but what about our daily lives? People cared more about things like having a better quality of life, improving welfare and social safety nets, having fair procedures, and a stronger voice in politics. In other words, the old idea, just endure now so the country can grow, became less acceptable. That's a natural change as a country gets richer and more democratic. At the same time, technology changed the game. The information revolution, computers, the internet, smartphones, made it harder for power to stay in one place. Information spreads fast, people organize fast, and mistakes get exposed faster. So civil society, the media, and citizens could monitor the government and big companies much more closely than before. The old developmental state system has been steadily losing force. But that doesn't mean the state should disappear. The state must shift from a commanding supervisor to a supportive facilitator that enables innovation. A qualitative upgrade of state capacity, aligned with technological change and shifts in global value chains, is urgently needed. What does that direction look like, in concrete terms? I'll outline it in the next slide. So if the old model is fading, what should replace it? The short answer is, Korea needs an innovation ecosystem. Basically, an environment where new ideas can actually survive and grow. Let's make this really concrete. Innovation doesn't only come from one genius inside one big company. A lot of innovation comes from small teams, startups, university labs, small suppliers with a clever idea, or young engineers who try something new. But for that to happen, the game has to feel fair. If the market is dominated by a few powerful players, smaller firms may think, even if we invent something, we'll get pushed out. That kills motivation. So what should the government do? Not play the game itself, and not secretly support one side. Instead, the government should act like a strict referee in sports, make clear rules, punish unfair actions, protect competition, and create space for new players to enter. If the referee is fair, then big firms still can succeed, but they succeed by being genuinely good, not by blocking others. And then startups and small and medium enterprises can also grow, because they know they have a real chance. That's the basic message of this slide. Future growth won't come only from executing fast. It will come from building a fair system, where creativity and experimentation are rewarded. Change is also needed within business groups. They must move beyond founder-centered decision-making and build more flexible structures where voices from the field translate into strategy. We need an ecosystem in which ventures and small and medium enterprises do not remain mere subcontractors, but become innovative firms that lead concept design on their own. Now let's move toward the conclusion. Please look at the next slide. Let's pull everything together as we move toward the end. Korea's compressed growth is honestly an incredible achievement. In just a few decades, Korea built factories, trained workers, created global companies, and raised living standards massively. That didn't happen by accident. It came from a specific system, a strong developmental state and strong, chaebol-centered industrial organization. But here's the tricky part. The same system that helped Korea climb up can also make it harder to climb the next mountain. In the past, it was okay to focus on speed and execution because Korea was catching up. Today, Korea is often near the global frontier. That means Korea needs more original ideas, more diversity, and more bottom-up experimentation. So the main message is, we need to reconnect conception and execution. Not just having a small top group decide everything, and everyone else only carries it out. We need more people involved in creating ideas. Engineers, designers, startups, researchers, and smaller firms. And we also need to move away from a rigid, vertical command structure towards something more horizontal, where big firms and smaller partners can collaborate as real partners, not just in a one-way hierarchy. So if I say it in one sentence, Korea's old model was great for sprinting. The next stage requires learning how to run a marathon, creative, flexible, and sustainable. In the post-catch-up era, an era in which we must lead and create the road ourselves, what we need most is creativity. From education to corporate culture to government policy, every regime must be realigned toward a single objective: innovation. Turning the memory of compressed growth into an asset, Korea must now move towards sustainable, higher quality growth. Finally, I'll close by summarizing today's key points. Please see the next slide. Let me finish with the big takeaway, what I hope you remember after this talk. Korea's growth didn't happen because of luck. It happened because Korea built institutions and habits that made rapid growth possible. Strong education, export-focused competition, coordination between government and business, and extremely strong execution. But the world has changed. Korea is not a poor latecomer anymore in many industries. So the new challenge is different. How do we turn that old strength, fast execution, into a new strength, original innovation? That means we need things like fair competition, more room for startups and smaller firms, and a culture where it's okay to try new ideas and fail sometimes. If we can do that, Korea can keep growing, but in a healthier, more sustainable way. So when you think about Korea's economic story, don't think of it as a finished miracle. Think of it as an ongoing project, one that now needs a new blueprint. When the government becomes a fair referee, firms become creative pioneers, and workers become agents of innovation, Korea's economy can once again surprise the world. I hope today's session offered a small spark of inspiration for drawing the blueprint of our economic future. Thank you very much for your attention.